Good afternoon to all the attendees. Thank you very much for joining today's session. I'm hoping that you will be able to take some valuable insights from our panel of speakers and that you will also be able to engage with us throughout the entire session. I'd just like to share my screen. Again, I'd like to give another welcome to all the attendees. For those that are still joining, please do ensure that, again, you take down any questions that you might have and then engage with us throughout today's session. My name is Takalani Nichpale, and I'm the champion of SAICE Ethics Committee, and I will be running you through who we are, what we do, and the type of support that we provide to you as an engineer in the industry, as well within the SAICE community. In terms of who we are as a SAICE Ethics Committee, we are a part of what we call the Growing Forward pillar, and we form part of Growing Forward pillar number 2 out of 7. And our purpose is to promote professionalism and integrity within the civil engineering industry. And how we do this is by ensuring that we create awareness of what it actually means to be an ethical engineer and how to conduct your duties as a professional within the industry. And how then we do this is through different forms of media. We conduct case studies and we publish this in the SAICE Civil Engineering magazine. We also hold talks such as this Ethics Imbizo and develop thought pieces which are then distributed throughout the communities of SAICE as well on the social media platforms. In terms of who we are, in addition to what I've mentioned, we also assist in developing a knowledge base on ethical practices. As engineers, we have ethical practices that we abide to not only within the Engineering Council of South Africa, but also within our organizations. And how we then do this is ensure that we take up all the ethical practices from learned experiences and experts in the industry to then support you as an engineer in the industry. We are a committee of a total of 16 members, which is composed of members from the SAICE National Office, as well as key industry players from within the built environment. What we also do is we support you as a SAICE member, not only by helping you and understand ethical behavior and promoting it within the industry, but also supporting our students and ensuring that when they do get into the built environment, they understand the importance of the profession, they understand ethics within their career, and also contribute to the national development. We also do offer advice to members who are dealing with unethical situations and review and assess reports as and when required. Lastly, then, to provide advice to the SAICE Executive Board. I'd like to introduce my team. I'll quickly run through it. As I mentioned, I am the champion / chairperson of the SAICE Ethics Committee. I'm also leading the team with Msam Kiza, who's my deputy. We're also supported by SAICE national members, Mr. Tom McCune, who's the SAICE head of training, as well as Ntabeleng Lentwani, who is the head of marketing and PR. Our committee members are also comprised of Alison Quinn Evans. We also have Mr. Vishal Lashman, who's also a part of the panelists today, Stuart Gibson, and Sharon McGarry, who's the executive assistant to the CEO. We also have Mr. Setela Maketa, who's also a former president of SAICE, and we're also supported by Sarlet Vermaak, who's the CFO of SAICE. And some of our other committee members, including Khairi Zaiman and Masandi Dududa, are also a part of today's session, including Bonnet Erasmus, Debo Korapolo, Retsepile Kabo, as well as Pearl Kumalo. In terms of some of the recent activities that we have conducted, we have published a few articles which touch on especially this ethics in Imbizo and building up to it and the purpose of why we wanted to conduct today's session. We also have published pieces that talk about how we can promote ethical behavior within the industry through collaboration. And we then briefly discussed it in the ethics webinar that took place last year. In addition to that, we also conduct ethical talks with university students to make them understand the importance of the Engineering Council South Africa's outcome number 8, which looks at ethics, as well as the graduate attribute number 10, which them as students have to comply to. In addition to that, we have published surveys to get your input on how we can support you better and what your views are on how our ethics in atmosphere is actually in South Africa as well within SAICE. And last but not least, we're currently developing an ethics handbook that will incorporate all the lessons learned as well as the ethical practices, not only within South Africa, but also throughout the entire globe, making sure that you have a handbook that can assist you in navigating through certain scenarios, through case studies and best practice procedures. In closing, then, I just want you to take a look at the screen, which is a credo of an African engineer. I'm not going to read through it. I'd like for you to browse the SAICE website for the specific credo. This credo was written by Mr. Maketa, and please do take into consideration the essence of what it stands for. It's something that should sit in your heart, that should sit on your wall and be a wallpaper as an engineer within the industry. Thank you. And on that note, I would like to then welcome our SAICE CEO, and this is Mrs. Sekadi Payanishakani. I'd like to ask that she provides some input on who ethics is and how we have been able to shape the ethical industry, as well as how civil engineering is being conducted throughout South Africa and how we intend on continuing this. Over to you, Mrs. Payanishakani.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Takalani. Good afternoon, colleagues, panelists, and distinguished guests. It is an honor to welcome all of you to this important gathering, the SAICE Ethics Imbizo. Thank you very much for that, Takalani. Good afternoon, colleagues, panelists, and distinguished guests. It is an honor for me to welcome all of you to this important gathering of the SAICE Ethics Imbizo. Today, we address a subject that is very important around ethics, as this affects the decisions we make, the actions we take, and the principles we uphold in our profession. All of these shape the built environment that we all work in and also influence how society functions and thrives. As engineers and built environment professionals, we have a unique responsibility. Our projects affect people's lives, their communities, and our children's futures. Thus, it is important that we do our work with our instilled values and integrity. As engineers and built environment professionals, we are responsible for maintaining public trust in the infrastructure that we provide. Unfortunately, this trust has been severely tested in recent times. Corruption, unethical practices, lack of maintenance, poor management, collusion, exorbitant tender pricing, undercutting fees have damaged the reputation of the engineering profession. We have witnessed cases of unethical tender processes, exploitation of local economic empowerment initiatives, unfinished infrastructure projects due to incompetent service providers appointed, and the like. This Imbizo gives us an opportunity to address these challenges head on. Our goal is to foster ethical leadership and accountability within the public and private sectors. We want to be part of the solution, creating a strong foundation of ethics upon which our profession can stand firmly. At SAICE, we believe that ethics are not just rules to follow, but a mindset to live by. This involves taking responsibility for our actions, holding ourselves and others accountable, and speaking out when we see misconduct. It also means committing to transparency and fairness in everything that we do. In closing, I would like to thank our ethics committee for putting this Imbizo together. And I also want to thank our distinguished panelists who have given up their time, their expertise, and commitment to this cause. We have representatives from various sectors who will all share their passion for promoting ethical leadership within our industry. I want to express my appreciation to all of you, our attendees, for being here today. Your presence shows your dedication to building a profession built on integrity. I encourage you to actively participate in today's section, to ask the relevant questions, you share your experiences, and most importantly, take what you learned today back into your workplaces and communities. Thank you very much, Takalani, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Madam CEO, for that. And thank you for also setting the scene for today's session. I highly do appreciate it. And I look forward to our panel of esteemed guests that will be talking today. And on that note, I'd like to then introduce our facilitator for today's panel discussion. And this is Ntabeleng Lentwane. She's the head of marketing and PR at SAICE. She will then be running through the panelists. She will provide input on who they are and give you some insight on where they're coming from, as well be able to facilitate any concerns or questions that you might have already raised through the registration link or might also then insert in the chat box. Over to you, Ntabeleng.
Thank you so much, Takalani. Good evening, colleagues. It's really wonderful to see how many people are joining us tonight. We had in the excess of 600 registrations. So we're very excited to be unpacking this very important issue as well. Like Takalani said, my name is Ntabeleng Lentwane. I've got the pleasure of moderating this session for the next, call it just under 90 minutes now. And how we're going to start is with 5-minute opening remarks from each of our speakers. So each of our esteemed panel I'll give a bio of each panelist, and thereafter invite them to give us opening remarks of ethical leadership related to their workspace. The hope really is to enlighten, educate, empower you. So in preparation for this, let me reiterate what Takalani just said and just ask you to prepare questions, comments, and feedback for the Q&A at the end. I always say the value of these sessions and webinars is in the questions that are asked. So we have designated a few minutes towards the end of the formalities where we'll open up the discussion by means of questions in the chat box. I've got the team here that will assist us in fielding those questions. And then also, if you do have a question that you'd like to ask audibly or verbally, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand during the Q&A, and I will enable your mic and allow you to ask your question and direct it to the panelists accordingly. So with those formalities done, and on that note, I've got the pleasure of introducing our first panelist. His name is Mr. Lufuno Rasiku. Mr. Lufuno is the president of the South African Council for Project and Construction Management Professions, a key professional regulatory body within the built environment that was established in terms of the Act number 48 of 2000. His role ensures compliance and enhances the standards of projects and construction management practices across South Africa with internal agreement across the built environment global space. So Mr. Rasiku holds multiple influential positions within the industry. He is the founder and managing director of Genuine Tenacity Consulting. He leads this company, which specializes in quality surveying and construction project management services. Lufuno served as a former non-executive director of Johannesburg City Power, where his governance skills contributed towards strategic decisions. He is also former board member of the Eskom Pension and Provident Funds, where he was the chairperson of the Human Resources and Remuneration Committee. Lufuno is a tribunal member and employer assessor of the Compensation Fund, appointed by the Minister of Employment and Labour. He enriches the academic community as well as part-time postgraduate lecturer in project management at the Tshwane University of Technology, that's TUT. My audience tonight, please give virtual emojis by clapping to welcome SACP-CMP President for his opening remarks, Mr. Rasiku. Over to you, sir. You can turn your video and voice on, your audio on, and begin your opening remarks. While you are turning your video and your voice on, Mr. Rasiku, I've seen 2 messages in the chat about people that were struggling with audio. If you don't mind leaving the session and coming back, your test about 2 minutes ago and saw that the sound is fine on our side. If not, please put the message in the chat again, and then we'll see how to assist you. Over to you, Mr. Rasiku. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, Ntabeleng. Good evening, colleagues. I hope we are well and ready for this important engagement. First, on behalf of the SACP-CMP, thank you for inviting us to form part of the discussion. We are quite elated to be part of this important ethics Imbizo. And the reason also for our excitement is that the topic is quite relevant, given the landscape of governance and where we are as a country. We are aware by now that we are highly challenged when it comes to ethics matters, and from time to time, the Zondo Commission, as a good example, has been a platform that revealed a lot in terms of where we stand as a country and our character. That has to be reflected upon and be dealt with when it comes to change. So the SAICE as a regulatory body, we have the code of ethics, which basically guides how our professionals should conduct themselves in their various disciplines in terms of our accreditations. And as such, we definitely look up for opportunities of this nature to engage and to participate in terms of discussing and changing the landscape of the ethics conduct of our professionals across the board. I think we are looking forward to be a part of this discussion and adding value as well. I have a lot to say, but I think the least I say, the better for now, so that I reserve a few for further participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think you'll find with the questions that will be asked that there's a lot that will glean from the regulator as well. So thank you for those opening remarks. Our next panelist now is the Executive for Group Ethics and Compliance at Barloworld. Prior to this, she was the Vice President, spearheading group compliance and ethics governance and assurance for SA Multinational Sasol. Dr. Yondela Ndema is her name. She is also the vice chairperson, and ministerial appointee of the University Council at the University of Johannesburg. She's built her reputation as a compliance and ethics expert and is frequently invited to speak at conferences throughout the country. She's a member of the International Women's Forum, Compliance Institute of South Africa, and Ethics Institute of South Africa, and a volunteer as well at the Africa End Sexual Harassment Initiative. Over the past 20 years, Dr. Ndema has held various senior positions at SARS, #FilingSeason, Investec, APSA, Alex Forbes, and the JD Group. She holds several non-executive directorships within Barloworld, including trustee of Barloworld Medical Scheme, non-executive director at NMI DSM and Barlow Park. Dr. Ndema is an admitted advocate with several undergraduate and postgraduate degrees from universities within South Africa and Harvard Business School as well. She's an avid reader and co-author of a book titled Sexual Harassment and the Law in Africa, Country and Regional Perspectives. Colleagues, again, put your virtual hands together as we make welcome Dr. Yondela Ndema. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was longish. You could have trimmed the extras about my bio, but thanks, Ntabeleng, thanks, colleagues, and good afternoon. And thanks, Mr. President, for those opening remarks. My name is Yondela Ndema, and it's a pleasure to be in your midst. I don't know how I got an invite. I'm not an engineer. So I think for me, in terms of the opening remarks, as evident in my background, ethics is part of my DNA. And I think as shared earlier on, in terms of your credo or mantra that you pledge integrity always. So integrity is an important value at the center of ethics, doing the right thing. And I think the challenge for me this afternoon to every attendee is to not just participate with the purpose of absorbing or learning, but how do we then go back to your respective places, environments, and workplace to implement what you would have picked up in terms of this session this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndema, for those insightful introductory remarks. We look forward to delving into the session in greater detail. Now, our next speaker needs no introduction within SAICE. He is a very well-known and respected leader at the institution. His name is Mr. Vishal Lachman. He's the managing director at Zutari, and most of us know him, but some of what you may not be aware of is some of the following. Mr. Lachman is currently completing a PhD in urban studies at the University of Johannesburg. He's also got qualifications, including an MPhil in leadership. He has an MBA, a diploma in business management, a BSc, a civil engineering degree, and a diploma in civil engineering, amongst others. He was CEO of SAICE prior to joining Zutari in 2022. Vishal is a professional engineer with 27 years of experience, and his passion primarily is in leadership and management of businesses, which is related to the development of infrastructure projects, mentoring, and also developing young engineers, which we'll hear a little bit about during the panel discussion. He was Director of Maritime Aviation and Rail Business at WSP, and prior to that, he spent 5 years with Royal Haskoning DHV as Director of Maritime and Freight Advisory Services. As Deputy Chief Engineer at Transnet, he also oversaw the parastatal's capital and port infrastructure projects across all ports in the country. He's a leader within the built environment space, and his focus is on integrating organizational strategies, operations, and technical capacity with future fit engineering. On that note, Vishal, welcome. You can give us your 5-minute opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntabaleng. Apologies for my lighting. It will get brighter with time. Unfortunately, I'm not in a place where I can make the good tricks for talking on a webinar. I hope it will get brighter so you can actually see me. But for what it's worth, the importance of ethics, especially in the built environment professional construction sector, is particularly important because, even more so as civil engineers, the term civil, if you read the constitution of the institution, says that we are servants of society. In so doing, being a servant of society means we are serving others, typically our communities that are around us. And in order to do so, it requires what I would say ethical habits. Now, our colleagues have already spoken about some of the issues that we sit with in terms of unethical habits. So the discussion today should really lead us towards how do we fix these things? What do we need to do differently so that we can achieve two things? One is, how do we live? How do we live as a society in an ethical space? And how do we take decisions that affect others in society? So for me, those two parts matter quite a bit. It's material to the way we do our work as professionals. And this applies to all professions and all societies. It's not something particular to South Africa or necessarily related to the Zondo Commission report or malfeasance. Ethics is way much broader than all of that. And perhaps if we start with the small things and get that right, it doesn't lead us to the big things that we get so wrong. So with that, I'll leave it there in Ntabaleng. I apologize again for the lighting. I hope it improves. I will try to do something while my colleagues are talking. But let's leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vishal, for those insightful remarks. And just thanks to my panelists for the time that you are affording us. I see we're running ahead of schedule, which will really allow us to go into the necessary detail during the panel discussion. At this point, I'm going to welcome our next speaker for his introductory remarks. His name is Mr. Neil Stansbury. And as part of the opening remarks, Neil is going to share a short presentation with us. But before you do, Neil, I'd just like to give a short bio for context. So Mr. Neil Stansbury is the co-founder and director of the Global Infrastructure Anti-Corruption Center. He's a construction lawyer who's worked for over 40 years in the international infrastructure space. He was chairman of the International Organization for Standardization Anti-Bribery Project Committee and also chairman of the British Standards Institution Anti-Bribery Working Group and vice chairman of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations Anti-Corruption Standing Committee. He was independent anti-corruption compliance monitor for Balfour Beatty, Parsons Brinckerhoff, and Maybe Bridge. He has given anti-corruption presentations and workshops in over 40 countries. And it's our honor to welcome you tonight, Neil, to the conversation. Members, once again, please put your hands together for Neil. Neil, I see your camera is on. You can just share your slides and take us through your introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ntabelang. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I presume you can see my slides on the screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'm just going to give a brief introduction in my 5 minutes to the activities of the Global Infrastructure Anti-Corruption Center, GIACC. And our website is on the bottom right of the screen there, and it's quite relevant because we have a huge amount of anti-corruption information on our website. But just a little bit of a brief oversight. What is the cost of corruption? People always ask this question. And we at GIAC look at corruption as being all of the criminal activities of bribery, extortion, fraud, cartels, abuse of power, embezzlement, and money laundering. Because we don't see any purpose in regarding corruption as just bribery or just abuse of office. It's much broader than that. And these offenses tend to overlap and work together. So we look at corruption as including all of these activities. And they're called by different terms in different legal systems, but they all end up in the same place. When people ask what the true cost of corruption is, of course, we have no idea whatsoever. It's hidden. Most corruption is not ever discovered. And if it is discovered, it's often not dealt with because the people that discover it may have connections with those in power. So we know very little about the true cost of corruption. But we can make broad estimates, wild guesses, perhaps we should better call it. But these estimates are frightening. The United Nations and World Economic Forum estimate 5% of global GDP is lost to corruption. In 2022 figures, global GDP is $101 trillion. So that would mean $5 trillion is lost per annum to corruption, which is higher than the GDP of Japan, which is the world's third largest economy. So it's a frightening amount of money. Transparency International in 2019 estimated that corruption costs developing countries 1.26 trillion per year, which would be enough to lift 1.4 billion people above the poverty threshold for 6 years. And TI's Global Corruption Barometer in 2017 recorded that 25% of all persons surveyed worldwide had paid a bribe in the last 12 months to access public services such as healthcare and education. So even if we can't put a figure on it, the actual cost is frightening conceptually. In the International Construction Sector, the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors estimated that unless significant action is taken to prevent corruption, by 2030, up to 5 trillion could be being lost annually to corruption. And of course, as we all well know, corruption disproportionately affects the poor, preventing or distorting safe food, safe water, healthcare, education, infrastructure. And also, it also causes death and injury due to dangerous infrastructure. And we here in the UK, which is where we're currently based, have just had the Grenfell Tower inquiry, which revealed a totally appalling lack of care and consideration by all the professionals involved in the Grenfell Tower fire, resulting in 72 totally avoidable deaths. Corruption was at the heart of the Grenfell Tower disaster, as it is at the heart of so many international infrastructure disasters. So in simple terms, corruption kills. So it's imperative that effective action is taken by everyone to prevent it. And everyone, however junior, however senior, whatever you're doing, everyone can play a role in this. So what role is GIAC playing, the Global Infrastructure Anti-Corruption Centre? Well, we are an international network of independent not-for-profit organizations which develops and promotes anti-corruption measures for the infrastructure sector. Our primary objectives are to raise awareness of corruption, to develop and publish free resources on the website, which I just indicated to you earlier, which assist in understanding, preventing, and dealing with corruption, and also promoting the implementation of effective anti-corruption measures by governments, by public sector bodies, and by private sector bodies. The lead organization in our network is GIAC International, which we lead here in the UK. We are the lead and coordinating body. We were established in 2008, and we operate internationally. We have currently 11 national affiliates, which together with GIAC International comprise our network. These affiliates are currently located in Australia, Colombia, Italy, Germany, Mongolia, South Africa, Tanzania, Tunisia, UK, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And we're in process forming 3 new affiliates in Namibia, Rwanda, and Uganda. And we are very proud that we have a very active affiliate in South Africa, GIAC South Africa, led by 2 superb colleagues of ours, Anton Krauser and Julian Rombolo. So we're very lucky to have a very good South African affiliate. We also have alliances which we sign with professional institutions worldwide. And we have 2 international alliances with the World Federation of Engineering Organizations and the World Council of Civil Engineers, 3 regional alliances, including with the Federation of African Engineering Organizations, and 23 national alliances in 16 countries. And we're very proud that one of our earliest national alliances and one of our strongest is with SAICE. And so we're very proud of that alliance with you. We in our GIAC Resource Centre provide free online information and tools designed to help people understand and prevent corruption. And since its launch in 2008, our Resource Centre has been visited online by over 875,000 users from 190 countries. Our ultimate aim is the achievement of a corruption-free society. Maybe it's, a very wild ambition, but you have to aim for 0. You can't aim for 5% corruption or 10% corruption. You must aim for a corruption-free society. And to achieve that, each key participant in society has a role to play. And according to their role, they must act ethically and take appropriate and effective anti-corruption action. Depending on who you are and what your influence and power is, these could include one or more of refusing to participate in corruption, raising awareness about corruption, taking effective steps to prevent corruption from occurring, and possibly even reporting and investigating and prosecuting it. These actions, which must be taken by all necessary parts of society, we can refer to as the anti-corruption pillars, because these pillars are all needed to support a corruption-free society. If these pillars are absent or weak, this can result in a corrupt society. And GIAC's resources are designed specifically to help build and strengthen these pillars. If I look at these pictorially, the grey columns are the pillars of a corruption-free society. At the bottom is the cesspool of corruption, burning hot, bad, dirty corruption at the bottom. We have to build our way out of that, to aim for a corruption-free society. And we build our way out of that by having an effective and ethical government, effective ethical parliament, courts, law enforcement, regulators, public sector organizations, private sector organizations, professional institutions, universities, schools, the press, and the public each one of those participants plays a role. If they are weak and crumbling, they weaken the entire edifice and can lead to corruption. So whatever column you are in, you can help build and strengthen your column. If you don't have these effective columns in place, you end up with that, half-built columns, weak columns, crumbling columns, and the top column at the top bar at the top will fall down and collapse and lead to a corrupt society. So that is our target. Let's build and strengthen all these anti-corruption pillars. And finally, how do we do that? Well, for all those pillars, all participants, we publish a lot of free material. We have a 30-minute online training module on our website, which you can undertake and print a certificate of completion at the end. We have workshops on how to identify, prevent, and investigate corruption. And I know that GIAC South Africa and SAICE are in the process of seeing how to roll out workshops throughout South Africa. We have on our free resource center online a huge amount of information on corruption, what it is, how it takes place, when it takes place, why it takes place, and its cost. Because unless you understand it, you cannot stop it. We have very detailed information on how you can stop corruption, and also specifically, what do you do if confronted with it? How can you deal with it? What do you do as an individual organization? And then to reflect many of the pillars on the previous slides, namely government, parliament, the courts, law enforcement, regulators, and public sector organizations, we've published the Commonwealth Anti-Corruption Benchmarks, which were written by GIAC, but published by the Commonwealth Secretariat in collaboration with the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. The South African government was actually a participant in the drawing up of the benchmarks, and they are a series of 25 auditable benchmarks which hold government, parliament, the courts, regulators to a minimum standard with which they should comply. And those organizations can get a third-party certifier to audit their compliance with the benchmarks so as to raise their level of integrity and compliance. For public and private sector organizations, GIAC played a leading role in the developments of ISO 37001, the published anti-bribery management system, which is applicable to all organizations, large, small, whatever country, whatever sector, public or private sector. And that is an auditable system for implementing an anti-bribery management system within a company. And the obvious conclusion is that public sector organizations should make it a condition of tendering that no company can tender for a project over a minimum value threshold unless it is independently certified to ISO 37001 by a reputable third-party certifier, just as you would require certification for 9001 and 14001, etc. And we also publish extensive guidance on how to implement such a system. For major infrastructure projects, we publish an auditable anti-corruption management system for the project, which controls all aspects of the project through selection, design, procurement, and construction, which put into place a series of measures designed to prevent and deal with corruption, all of which is third-party auditable. For professional institutions, we have an anti-corruption implementation plan to help guide professional institutions to take a leadership role in preventing corruption, just as SAICE is playing a leadership role in South Africa. And finally, for universities, we've published a university anti-corruption course, which is free of charge to universities, which they can implement preferably in engineering, law, accounting, business schools, so that students leave university fully understanding how corruption takes place and what their role is when they go into the work environment in how to prevent it. So thank you very much for listening to that, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Neil, for those very insightful opening remarks, and looking forward to delving more into the detail. And just to let the audience know that after the session, as part of the thank you email, we'll include more detail around those free resources so that you can take advantage of them as well. Our next speaker to give opening remarks is Mr. Thabo Magala. He's the District Director at the Eastern Cape Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. He holds a Master's of Science in Built Environment Project Management, and he's also a registered professional construction project manager with SACP-CMP. His career began at the now Raymond Mhlaba local municipality more than 20 years ago, and it's seen him grow in roles, housing policy procedures in managing government assets, legislative prescripts, governing processes, and also overseeing the implementation of infrastructure projects. His mandate at the department is now founded on the coalface of the service delivery of managing government immovable assets portfolio and infrastructure delivery. All of this is done through leading and coordinating related disciplines in the district in ensuring that the delivery of infrastructure remains the backbone in this very challenging process of bettering the lives of the people of my home province, the Eastern Cape. So over to you at this time, Mr. Magala, for your opening remarks. You can turn your camera on and give your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tabi, for that warm welcome. I'm happy to be here as well. In fact, I'm beaming with excitement and looking forward to the discussions of the day. But mine is more, and as have been articulated on my profile, that I'm coming more on the public sector part of things or space. So without wasting any time, if anyone is actually employed or is actually employed within the public space, you have to acquaint yourself with the constitution of this country, particularly when you are looking at the issues of ethics and professionalism. We'll be talking about section 195 of the constitution. That is a subsection 1A of the constitution, that is chapter 10 of the constitution. So now it's actually clear in terms of how we should be conducting ourselves as the public servants. Furthermore, just to give a bit of perspective, because we are public works and we are also a sector departments, our role obviously is to look after the other institutions, that is the sector institutions, in assuring that we give them the infrastructure, we take care of the infrastructure. Then in the process of doing that, we have to actually ensure that we acquaint ourselves those legislation that actually have to talk with the ethics. For an example, we'll have your King 5 principles, which is the principle 1 and principle 2, wherein it talks about the governing body's responsibilities with regard to ethics and ethical leadership. Also, we also have other prescripts in a form of that come from Department of Public Services and Administration, which guides on ethics and management and public service regulation. That is Regulation 23 of 2016. Now, in capturing what we are talking about on the day, that is the ethics leadership, I've tried to look back and check on the perspective of learning perspective when you talk about ethics. Then ethics will be actually talk about ethics and morals, of course, because the two cannot be separated. If you're talking about ethics, you have to talk about the morals as well. So now, if we're talking about that, you have to check what is the principle, where it actually coming from, the ethics. The name ethics is coming from ethos, which is a Greek word, which also the other word, that is the moral, comes from morales, which is coming from the Latin. With both words mean basically the way of life. So now, if we're talking about ethics now, we're talking about the way of life. But furthermore to that, we've got different types of ethics. The one that actually came across with is basically the deontological ethics. The other one is theological ethics. The other one I came across with was the deontological ethics, like I said, theological ethics, as well as situational ethics. But at the center of these particular ethics, what is actually critical about them is the ability to glean the information and be able to understand the space that you're actually operating. At the same time, with these ethics, they come at the same time as more prevalent in terms of as a human beings, that as human beings by nature were created to do good. As a result, in terms of doing good, that comes naturally as us to be ethical. Then now, at the same token, when we actually do this now, we have to actually integrate as well the e-leadership, which is the other portion of our topics today, which is the leadership. Now, the leadership is primitively is basically those people that can be able to influence. Then if you are influencing as with the ethical leadership, it means you are influencing with the courtesy that you are actually leading, as well as making feel people that they are able to actually express themselves in a form of issues that they are pertaining to the ethical as the leader that's ethical. At the same time, probably actually put this one at the end and during the discussion maybe. But I want actually just to bring in also closer that in as much as that we are operating in the space of the of public sector, the public sector is extremely legislated, like I've already mentioned earlier on. We come to the constitutions. At the same time, we do have other prescripts that are purely looking at the leaders at the space of the sector departments, meaning your chapter 6 of the SMS handbook, which is very clear of how we should be conducting themselves or conducting ourselves as the leaders in the sector department or in the public sector, and how are we supposed to be doing our line of duty. At the same time, if we're looking at the ethics against the rules are there to tell us what we can do. But if you're talking about the ethics, they come natural to tell us what we should be doing. So on that note, facilitators, I think most of the part of my material I would actually share as we're actually going on with the engagement through the panel. Thank you very much.
Wow, short and sweet and to the point. Thank you so much, Mr. Magala. I'm reminded of Maya Angelou, who said, if you know better, you can do better. So I think we're learning a lot from our panelists already. I've been making notes throughout these opening remarks, and I hope our audience has been too, preparing for the questions. We're now coming into the meat of our conversation, which is the panel discussion. I'd like to ask all our panelists to just put all your cameras on for the duration of the panel discussion so that we can see you. Hopefully the network stays stable throughout, but let's assess that as we go. I'm going to be fielding questions related to the themes that we're going to be discussing. And I'm going to be asking for responses and feedback and just insight from our panelists as we continue the conversation. We have just over 30 minutes to run through the panel discussion, and I'm going to kick off this conversation with the project and construction management regulator. And from your side, Mr. Rasihu, and with the permission of the panelists, I'm going to address you by your first names just to make the conversation flow. So, Lufuno, my opening question relates to ethics in processes. Can you kick us off with talking to us a little bit about ethical management in the development of projects in particular? How can ethics be integrated from the beginning so that the entire project lifecycle or process progresses in the right manner from the beginning? You can just unmute and give us your thoughts on that. Sorry, you're on mute.
Thank you, Ntabeling. I think I tricked myself here, and I will have to force myself to respond with my slides. I interpreted the context of opening remarks differently, and I'm realizing that the presentation time is done and gone with the opening remarks. Am I correct?
You are right. Are there slides that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I think I would just rather have to do that. Otherwise, I can, yeah, let me just quickly share and respond to your question. So I'll have to avoid a lot of other slides and just go specifically to what answer your question.
Okay, that's fine. You can share your screen and then also include the answer to the question while you are at it. That's fine.
Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. You can just go to full screen mode. That's perfect. Thank you.
So let me maybe build it up by starting with a very small quote that emanates from the poem that speaks about accountabilities and responsibilities. And maybe if you don't mind, also guide how much time is allocated per question so that I don't violate your rules of engagement.
I think we're not prescriptive in the time, just to be cognizant that we've got quite a few questions to cover throughout the session, and the session will be 30 minutes. So perhaps a minute to two for all the panelists for responses to the questions. Thank you.
All right, great. So in terms of building the ethics as part of the process, and I think I'm going to respond in the context of SAICE and its project lifecycle, which has 6 stages, which is initiation and briefing, concept and feasibility, design, development, procurement, construction, and closeout. Now, our code of conduct, and I'm referring to the ethical code of conduct or code of ethics, which basically governs how our professionals should conduct themselves. You would realize that in those 6 stages, if the practices are not ethically tied, a project can stop anywhere within those stages, meaning it may not proceed further to the next stage or just until its life cycle. How do we see that? We see that by the evidence of abandoned projects in South Africa. They are massive enough for us not even to go to the numbers. Now, when you build the ethical culture into the process and a full life cycle of project management, number one, you must execute and implement training, which will make the professionals to be aware. And I'm talking in assumption that in the projects, only registered professionals on the side of professional services shall be involved. Now, ethics need to be backed up by a lot of research, needs to be backed up by support of moral principles, which are understood in the context of the profession that an individual is in. And in this case, I'm referring to the built environment professional. And obviously, as part of the build-up, one must have signed and understood the rules, the code of conduct, the rules and regulations of the client you are also servicing, and the values of the organization that you are in and serving. In closing, King 4 provided a definition of what organizational ethics are about. And it says, in the context of organizations, ethics refers to the ethical values applied to decision-making, conduct, and the relationship between organizations and its stakeholders. So you cannot be ethical alone because you are affected by the people that you live with. So in other words, the framework must be there in terms of how do you relate with your organizations that you partner with? How do you relate with the clients? How do you relate with the whole full value chain and everybody that is involved within? So this is not a case of one man's righteousness. You cannot be ethical alone. You need to integrate the team with similar set of principles so that you are judged and benchmarked from the same ground in terms of your ethical conduct. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lufuna. I think you've mentioned a few interesting points that I'd like to build on. You sparked my interest when you alluded to ethical culture and how to build that. And I think let me go to Yondela because I know that you do have some insights related to how to build ethical culture. I think the aspects relating to King 4, we're going to come into that later in the discussion when we're talking about the more granular issues such as whistleblowing. But Yondela, from your side, what are the best practices, in your opinion, as it relates to the building blocks towards an ethical culture?
Thank you, Ntabeleng, for that question. So ethical culture at Barloworld is something that we take seriously. And as we speak, we actually have a group project on ethical culture. So at a high level, one of the indicators that you are looking at in terms of measuring our ethical culture is the so-called age analysis. That is time taken from when a complaint is lodged or a report is lodged by our ethics line to resolution. And what we've then done is to identify all the bottlenecks, whether it's from an HC point of view, because the investigator will say, actually investigated, there was evidence of wrongdoing, I then handed over the report to HC or to employee relations. They are the ones who are stalling the process. So the essence of that project is to identify in terms of all the contributing stakeholders in building an ethical culture, because it's not this portfolio's only deliverable, because we do our bit in terms of the ethics line. And since you are an listed company, we are fully held accountable and audited vis-a-vis internal and external auditors. So that's number one. And then secondly, it's tone at the top. So tone at the top is an important one in terms of building an ethical culture. And that translates to, for example, consistency of sanctions or consistency of consequence management, because it's important that you be fair in terms of how you apply disciplinary action. And it's something that we actually report on insofar as our board reporting is concerned. So for instance, we have what is called an employment code. Maybe in other companies is called a disciplinary code. So when we receive a tip-off, I mean, I'm also responsible for group forensic investigations and the group ethics line. So when we receive a report in terms of an investigation that would have been conducted, so we have absolute discretion in terms of closing a call. That means if a matter is substantiated, we do not close that investigation on the system until we have proof of remediation. So we don't take your word for it when you say you've taken action against Thabo. We insist on proof of what we call proof of remediation, because what then happens is if we are audited, we give our external auditors, same as internal auditors, access to the case management system. So that's the second one in terms of, I think, consistency of sanction is quite key. And then at the core of an ethical culture, I'll touch because I see there's a question on the line which touches on that. I think protected disclosures. I mean, we've seen and read, colleagues, in terms of the Babita case. So you cannot promote a speak-up culture and not parallel to that build whistleblower protection or protected disclosures, or ensuring that the whistleblowers who dare risk their lives in speaking up, they won't only be protected, but they will also be heard, and what they are reporting on, you will act on it. So for us as a listed company, in terms of responding to your question, one of the building blocks is we take retaliation and victimization seriously. And as a result, so for instance, our ethics line is outsourced to Deloitte. So we have an independent tip-offs anonymous line. So one of the categories that we've built and areas of improvement that we've built in terms of building that ethical culture was to build a category called retaliation, whereby we have added a script to Deloitte call center. And I mean, we've had to train them on that when a person logs a tip-off, give them a heads up that should they be victimized or retaliated against, they should report that. Then we do not hesitate to run a parallel investigation if we get feedback that the whistleblower who had reported initially was then victimized or subjected to an occupational detriment. I'll park there. Thanks.
And thanks so much. It actually leads to what would have been our next point relating to whistleblowing. And I also do see the question, you know, from Michelle in the chat, and I think it speaks quite closely to what we are talking about now. To say systems can be in place to whistleblow, but trust is still a big factor in terms of what you speak of, particularly relating to victimization and retaliation. I think we've all seen in the news recently of an engineer, one of our own engineers within the profession rather, based in Vereeniging, who was killed after reporting a contract price inflation. So these issues do exist. They are reality, and I think it's conversations like tonight that go into detail to support corporations and organizations in terms of how to begin establishing those within their own spaces. So I'd like to now move on with our conversation, and just to ask you, Neil, from your standpoint now, looking at the global view, can you give us a sense of how, your organization collaborates with public sector entities, so that's government and also businesses and society, to promote transparency, to promote trust and integrity within the infrastructure space, and then some examples of successful collaborations, if you have these?
Yeah, thank you, Ntobeko. That's a very good question. And I'll answer the end of your question first. Successful collaborations are rare because we find quite considerable difficulty in getting the agreement of public sector bodies to what we think quite simple anti-corruption mechanisms. So although we do engage extensively with public sector bodies, our success rate, I think, is low, unfortunately. And I would say that the key points that we emphasize to public sector bodies are a few quite simple mechanisms which can really raise the bar. The one I touched on earlier, which is the ISO 37001 anti-bribery standard, is now recognized international standard. It's been in force for 7 years, and thousands of companies in more than 70 countries now implement it. And I've seen it put in place in many companies. It's a very powerful tool. It's much more powerful than ISO 9000 quality, 14001 environment, and 5001 safety. It's much more specific in its requirements. And a lot of the points that Yondela and Luthu are raising there are actually integral to the standard. So you have to prove to an external auditor that you've implemented all these anti-bribery mechanisms. And it works. It really does work. I've seen magnificent changes in companies' behavior because it requires at the top, like Yondela mentioned, it requires training, it requires a code of conduct, vetting of your employees, disciplining your employees, controls over procurement, controls over finance, controls over project management, controls over your supply chain. It's very extensive. So you wouldn't expect a small company with 5 or 6 people to have it, but you would expect any company doing any material public sector works. So we think that one paragraph in public sector procurement rules, which states, say, from the 1st of January 2025, no contractor can bid for any public sector contract over a value of, say, equivalent to $250,000 US equivalent, unless they are independently certified to ISO 37001. One sentence is all you need. That would materially raise the ethical bar, as long as the public sector body ensures that the external auditors are reputable, proper auditors, from reputable certified auditing bodies. That would be the biggest stroke in a way. And secondly, transparency is it is a terrible indictment of the public sector that public sector money is being spent without total, absolute transparency to the public who actually own that money. So therefore, in our view, all public sector contracts should be put entirely on the internet. Of course, not before they are placed, because you need secrecy in tendering for competitive situations. But once contracts are placed, all the competitive tenders which failed and the one that succeeded should be put on the internet in full. All variation orders, all claims, all payments, everything, because everything is done electronically now in construction. It's all electronic. It's easy. Should be posted on the internet on a specific project site. Very cheap, very easy. But then you get an army of the public watching and being able to report. And that's the third point, is having an adequate reporting system where people who see any suspicions of corruption can safely and confidentially report it. And then you need a proper investigation arm who can and will look into the transgressions which have been reported. So I think with these relatively simple mechanisms, public sector procurement could be transformed. But in the UK, we do not have this. The UK government is not interested in publishing information on the internet. It's not interested in implementing ISO 37001. And look what we're getting now. We're getting huge scandals, Grenfell Tower, the post office scandal, and the COVID purchasing scandal. We're getting rampant corruption in our public sector. So that would be my recommendation. Some simple, easy hits, quick hits.
Thanks, Neil. And I think it's only logical to come to the public sector space with you, Thabo. I just want to talk a little bit around factors related to recognizing and regulating ethical practice within your space, and by extension in the public sector, particularly because many entities within the public space are not always equipped to deal with ethical issues related to infrastructure development. Any thoughts around that from your side?
Thank you, Tabi. Yes. I think when we talk of the prescribing of the prescripts that should be guiding any forms of ethics should be there, But as I'm sitting trying to cool my mind around the ethics in infrastructure in public works, right, or public sector, right. Now, obviously, if you're talking about the institutionalized way of dealing with ethics, we have it there. As I was actually opening to say, when you talk of the ethics when senior management, it's prescribed, it's clearly articulated, it's sitting on the chapter 6 of the SMS handbook for the SMS, right? So now that is actually there prescribed, right? But now what I'm actually getting my mind into, which is actually making perfect sense, is when you cascade that, or we actually intercalate that or tap that on the other side, meaning the actual procuring of the infrastructure. I think we should actually admit to say we as infrastructure sector, we've been evolving. There was issues around, particularly on the procuring, because I think the whole can of worms is sitting on the actual procuring, not necessarily on the operations on the actual infrastructure, which I believe is a very bad way of looking at this, right? Because I honestly believe that for us to be able to get where we want to get to, we should be able to cleanse out the personnel that deals with the infrastructure, other than putting another red tape that's going to actually inhibit us to get where we want to. Because already, if you can check when it comes to prescripts, we've got SAM policies, we've got currently, I think we've got just launched the IDMS Act as well, which also, trying to facilitate the process of procuring the infrastructure. So we need to be very careful when we're actually putting in what we can say badly red tapes, because already public sector is already tainted as a bureaucratic more, obviously because they've got a lot of policies that are trying to, inhibit us to do certain things. So I want us to be very careful when we are bringing in, prescripts that of course, intend or seek to address the issues of the ethics, because already we do have them already there. But now what is not there, which I think is very critical, I wanted to actually bring this on the part of my openings to say, for an example, we've got a situation at the public space where we want people to account, but in the process of accounting, the case of that accountability will take about 3 to 4 years or more, right? Between the time the person has already gone, right? But if we have closer the professional bodies where they are registered as the practitioners, we are able to actually get them to account. So I wish, in as much as that we want to actually have these prescripts that are actually more ethical aligned, but be very careful at the same time we don't stifle the process or stifle the value chain that we are not able to reach where we want to reach. We want to finish the projects on time. We want to get anything and everything on time. But we are more stringent or more actually curtailed by the prescripts that actually inhibit us to get where we get. But I get the notion of us, let's maybe probably bring in ethics on how we actually contract. I understand, I actually take the issue of maybe at the long run, we are actually taking an issue on saying, let's have a database wherein we have to say or vet our service providers and actually assure that they do subscribe under the ethics when actually we are to project them to our space. But that's my take for now. Thank you, Tari.
Interesting thoughts indeed. I think one word that keeps coming up at SAICE, anyways, is collaboration. So if there are opportunities for us to collaborate better with the public space in order to make it easier for that accountability to take place, I think it would definitely be worthwhile. There's two words that just keep coming to mind as you were speaking, and it's the unknowing and the unwilling. So sometimes people genuinely don't know, and then many times they know but are unwilling to do what they need to do. So perhaps while we're on the topic, Thabo, let me follow up with an issue related to capacitating. So from a skills development point of view within the public sector space, what are some of the ways to deal with the declining skills and expertise within the public space, especially considering that an employee, an official, they're vulnerable when they don't know what they should be doing. So when you don't know what you should be doing, you are vulnerable and can be influenced to do what you shouldn't be doing. And when you are clear on what the needs are, what the course of action should be, then you are able to be empowered to make better decisions as well. What's your take on this?
You are spot on, Tabby. You are absolutely spot on. I think when I was actually making my opening, I actually touched on the many types of ethics. I think I mentioned about 4. The one that is actually closer to what you are saying is the theological ethics, which resonate more on information gathering so that you can be able to make informed decisions. Rightfully so, when you are saying the capacitation is key. We've got many ways of recruiting, which other people wouldn't actually find, pleasant, because they're kind of discriminating in some, because there are fair discrimination in most of you. But point number to get to is that in terms of us being able to get over the bar, where we want the ethics to thrive, is get information. I think the president already mentioned the issue of research around the ethics. So definitely, if you want to actually have people that are able to clearly do ethical things, are people that know what's supposed to be done on the first place. So other times that we find ourselves wanting, especially on the public sector, if you can just walk in out the gate and actually check, do you guys know what public works is all about? Can you tell me what are you doing in public works? Those are the first things when I actually arrived, of course, joined the institution. Try to tutor the colleagues just to get just a grasp of what public works is all about. Then from there, we can be able to build on to say, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do, this is what you are supposed to be doing on the first place as a public servant. So I fully agree with you, absolutely spot on, when you are saying, let's probably invest on the capacitation, which also addresses the issue of the ethic as well. Because if you know, you are able now to know what is supposed to be done, because you know what is supposed to be done in the first place. So yes, you are absolutely spot on with that. Capacity building is actually key, and especially if you are to do across the board, because if you're talking about the capacity, it shouldn't be only just delineated or only confined to the built environment practitioners, because obviously I'm dealing here with the mixed bag. I'm actually dealing with the built environment practitioners. I'm also dealing with non-built environment practitioners as well, because obviously we've got the transfers that actually assist us as built environment practitioners. We've got SAM, we've got human resource. So all that should actually come in terms of that capacitation, so that the person that is sitting at human resource is able to understand what type of candidate is actually, competent to be able to actually join the institution. If you're talking on the side of the SM, what type of service provider and how to actually go about in procuring that service provider to come and join this institution. Thank you very much for that. I really actually also concur with you, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Thabo. And I think going from the public sector now, moving into the private sector, Vishal, I want to come to you now because many of the members that are joining us tonight are SAICE members who work in various private sector entities. They're business owners, they are professionals that are carrying out civil engineering work on a daily basis. From a consulting space, there are obviously many ethical issues that we hear from our members. We visit the regions, and as part of those visits, we visit consulting firms just to find out what's happening within their own spaces. And I'd like to now give you an opportunity to talk to us a little bit around how corruption typically manifests within the infrastructure space. And perhaps as you're doing that, also tell us a little bit about what some of the common ethics or ethical challenges that consultants face within the private sector space. Thank you.
Thanks, Ntabeleng. I can see myself, so I assume you can see me as well.
Yes, we can, and the light is fine now. Thank you.
I need to start where my colleague Thabo started to speak. There's a prevailing narrative that perhaps the public sector is corrupt. And that's where I have a problem with, because in my mind, it takes two hands to clap. The other side of a corrupt transaction typically ends up in a private space. So in my mind, as much as it seems to originate in public sector, there's the temptation that exists in the private sector as well to corrupt the public sector. So when it comes to the consulting space, there's quite a few places that I would say it exists. The public sector is largely procuring through an open procurement system. From a project point of view. What happens is consulting firms, in the first instance, may deceive the public sector entity or the agency that they can actually perform the work through submissions of documentation that seems to tick the boxes that are required. Sometimes it's not completely true. In other words, they're not able to perform the work, but wish to generate the revenue on the back of that appointment. The inability of public sector to figure that out in terms of the quality of work that they would require is perhaps not there. And we spoke about the capacity of the system to actually figure that out. The other thing is, when it comes to bidding, we find that some bids on the two envelope system, the financials are open before the technical. In other words, there's a manipulation of bids, so preferred firms can win these opportunities, and that perpetuates the corruption narrative. But remember, it's always public and private. It's difficult for the large or the big ticket items for just public sector to stick on that. So I would support the narrative that we are all to blame in this corruption discussion. We also have the public sector misleading sometimes, in other words, putting out bids that do not get awarded. That creates a huge amount of effort on the private sector side to submit opportunities or responses to opportunities that would never get awarded. When it comes to pricing, there's a deviation from the XR guidelines on terms of fees. There's a belief that the lowest price is the best answer for getting the work done. But remember, if you're not having a quality criteria, you're not going to be aware of whether you're going to get what you asked for. There are also individuals that misrepresent themselves in the firms as well, to the extent where they would claim their competency, but really not be competent in the firm that is submitting a CV, which on the face of it looks like it is appropriate. Project references that are submitted as part of opportunities in some cases are incorrectly reflected as the firm doing the work, but in fact, they've not done the work. We've had cases where we've got similar project references where I've been called to the client to explain why are other two firms claiming the same reference. In other words, three firms are saying we did the same job. Now, when it comes to exploring that and calling it out, then it becomes a he said, she said, and I worked on this as part of something, etc. But really speaking, the firm didn't do the work. So misrepresentation of information is something that we find. The other thing is the public sector's inability to manage budgets. So what we're finding is when we get appointed to do a piece of work, the first few payments are made, but the remaining ones are not. There's various ways of kicking the can down the road in terms of the deliverables are not good enough, or the work is not complete, or you missed an element of scope, etc., etc. But what's happening behind the scenes is there's no money. Now, the PFMA says that you cannot award a contract if you do not have the complete budget for that assignment. Correct me if I'm wrong, Thabo. So you're not allowed to award a contract if you do not keep the budget intact. There's an inability to hold the budget for some reason, and it's not clear why, but it's removed often, or it's too not enough, and we are now compromised from a private sector. And there's an element of bullying that often comes into that, where public sector thinks private sector needs to always play second fiddle to that. So the balance of power in a transaction is what's, for me, unethical. There's a belief in this in the South African industry, for example, that the private sector serves the public sector. And I think that's where the immaturity in the transaction comes through. When this is formed, ideally, one should actually look at partnerships. We are partnering as an extension of the public sector entity to support on a certain project. We are not the enemy. The private sector is not the enemy of public sector. Although colleagues in the industry will make it like that because we have also got unethical behaviors happening in parallel that would give the client that feeling. So those are just some of the few issues related to the experiences that private sector may have in working with public sector. It's become very difficult as well over time, because I go back to the constitution that you were talking about. There's an element of reparation that is right in the first part of the premise of the constitution. In other words, we have a journey to go through to bridge this inequality, but we're not helping ourselves by being unethical. So that reparation is not happening, which means inequality is perpetuated. And that brings in other forces in the process. In doubling the second part of the question, if you don't mind repeating that.
Yeah, so I was just, in fact, not even to repeat, but I think before I lose my train of thought, can you just expand on now how public-private partnerships can be structured in order to mitigate those risks? What's your take on that?
The structuring of that relationship really, you've got to work from the basis of what is that partnership really going to achieve? And that partnership, what is the model going to be used to enforce and keep that transaction reliable? What has happened in the South African context, you would have noticed that there's a big private sector drive for investment in the country. Now, in my mind, my personal opinion, I believe that it is due to the fact that many public sector entities are no longer sustainable. Because the private sector discussion was on the table 20 years ago, and it was discarded each and every time it was discussed. Okay, so there was no favor for such a partnership. The partnerships that are now put on the table is because of an unsustainable situation that we have reached. Many of the entities are not going concerns, and they're unable to fund their own capital or maintenance budgets. Okay, so now they think, public sector is thinking, private sector has money, come to the party, let's form a partnership. But the ideology may make sense. However, the reality is not so easy, because the gearing that is required on the public sector side to organize itself for such a transaction is not there. The other consequence is the misunderstanding of risk and how risk transitions between public sector and private sector. For example, many transactions in this country, especially when it comes to PPPs, is a complete risk shift. In other words, and I've found that on the continent as well, where the public sector entity believes the private sector should carry all of the risks. Okay, that is not palatable very often, and there's also unnecessary compliance requirements that hurt that transaction and makes it very expensive. So when we start to make bankable feasibility studies, it becomes difficult to actually make the project viable because the risk is not balanced. The private sector has to load that in terms of the pricing, and it becomes a not feasible project where it could have been, because the misunderstanding of risk and the apportionment of risk is not fully appreciated. Private sector cannot bear all of the risk because it doesn't have a balance sheet that is of similar size to a public sector entity. Typically, public sector balance sheets are far more bigger than the private sector entity providing that partnership. So the balance of risk is one of those things that really compromise the South African entities from entering into successful public-private partnerships. Thank you.
I hear you. Thank you. Thank you for those remarks, Vishal. And I think that the second part of the question, which you did answer, was related to the challenges that consultants face. And there's an email I want to read. We're going to open up for Q&A as we continue the discussion. If you do have questions that you would like to ask verbally, please, you can raise your hand and keep it raised. I see one question in the chat so far. But this email came from a member, and I'm going to ask you, Lufuno, to give us thoughts from your space relating to it. I won't mention his name, but he says, I speak from my position as a registered professional engineer in a construction company who has been in construction for 36 years. While I have no hope that things will significantly change in my lifetime, maybe sometime in future things can change. My concerns are that government has been instrumental in the systematic breakdown of what was once a professional, ethical industry, where appointments were generally made on the excellence of service by engineers. The same holds true for procurement and the building of infrastructure. Transformation has been used as an excuse to allow the participation of non-qualifying entities who arguably do not have suitably qualified registered professional engineers. Civil engineering requires people of suitable track record, who are known in industry to be reputable, who have recognized qualifications from recognized educational institutions. The so-called tender process creates an illusion of transparency in the public eye, which is not always true. Much of what happens is decided at a much higher level prior. In a recent tender briefing that I attended, this is him now, the names that I saw were shelf trading companies and companies that offer cleaning services, gardening services, maintenance, and general dealers. These entities who do not know how to do the work then end up getting the work and end up subcontracting the work to people who do shoddy work. And so the endless spiral of corruption and mismanagement continues. No consequences, no accountability. Also, the so-called 30% local spend is none other than an extortion tool created to empower the so-called construction mafia and business forums. What can be done? Any thoughts from your side, Lufuno?
Tabeling, let me be honest with you. I've got more than 20,000 thoughts on this subject line that your participant has just raised, but let me reduce them to one. And I'm going to deal with this through one slide. Just confirm if you can see the slide.
It's loading. Just give it a moment. Okay, you can put it in full screen. Yes, we can see it now. Thank you.
You know, Tabeling, the problem with me is that I prepared as if I'm going to speak alone. That's how I love myself and my passion to this industry. Now, the speaker is very precise and accurate in their observation. except that I persuade them to not lose hope. There are a lot of interventions that we are doing. Myself, speaking on behalf of the SAICE-PCMP, I move around every week, and my specific duty, which nobody basically gave me, is to lobby the industry to use qualified and registered professionals. If you look at the slide that I'm sharing, I am idealizing the desirable procurement evaluation criteria which must be used to evaluate the professional services companies. And I'm using this to answer his question because the aspect number one that I'm bringing there is professional registration, but the context of that professional registration is that the owner must be registered himself, not somebody hiring registered professionals, just to be clear with that point. Now, the 30% that I'm indicating there is a weight, is not the level of ownership that the owner must be having in that company, because that must be 50 plus 1. The idea of professionals working for unprofessionals is just unacceptable in this industry. And I keep on giving examples that if I walk into a hospital and I want to perform surgery, I'm going to be arrested. Why? I'm not a registered medical practitioner to perform that duty. And it's correct to say transformation has been used as an excuse, but let's come with an answer. What should we be doing? The Council for Built Environment, which is CBE, and its councils within the profession must daily, including myself, lobby the clients who are government departments and even the private sector to only make use of professionally registered companies, meaning the owner must be registered, the company itself must be only registered by a registered individual, not somebody else who's going to pick up CVs to an extent that a taxi driver can get angry, gather CVs and tender and compete with professionals. That is unacceptable. And that must come to an end. And there's a lot of work that we are putting to make sure that that comes to an end. The second aspect that I'm speaking about in answering his question is, when you speak about relevant experience of the registered professionals, you must give it weight in the sense that it doesn't become red tape, but it acknowledges their experience, which is technical, so that you don't have non-technical people participating in that in the field. The last aspect maybe to deal with his question is that in terms of the technical resources that are involved in the project, they must only and by demand of the law be registered with legislative bodies. Why am I calling for this point as if it's not obvious? It's not obvious because there are clients that are still allocating points to bodies that are not legislated in the country. And that too must come to an end. And the whole point why and how that should be done. The partnership between registered professionals in terms of how they should advance the advocacy of their professional bodies, which are legislated. That must be done alongside with voluntary associations. For example, SAICE supports the work of EXA, although it deals with one category of civil engineers, that's okay. Now, the voluntary associations that are associated with SAICE-PCMP, SAICE-QSP, EXA, SECAP, and all our built environment councils must raise one voice to say, in this space, we are not going to accept unregistered professionals coming to participate. What is the risk as I close? When building collapses, there is no accountability. Why? The individual that you are using is not associated with a professional indemnity insurance if he's an unregistered professional. And again, the insurance companies must know that they can only insure a registered professional. That's how we'll get rid of the unregistered professionals in the space, and ultimately move to a well-transformed and professionalized sector. I think the president of this country is very loud around the voice of professionalizing the public sector. And we all need to join hands and ensure that we eradicate this practice, because it's not accepted anywhere. In the accountancy field, it's not accepted. In the insurance field, it's not accepted. But it's only us here who compete with strangers who are not trained in our professions. Thank you very much. Let me cut it there. But I've got a whole lot of slides that are speaking to this. But like I said, I prepared like I was going to speak alone. And maybe that's being narcissistic of me. Thank you very much.
And I think you share the sentiments of many of our members. I see many hands that are clapping in support of your remarks. Is Makaya gone? Makaya, I was about to give you a chance to go on air. The chat is now open. This is your Q&A and opportunity to ask our esteemed panel your burning questions. Makaya, I think I'm going to allow I've enabled your mic. Just unmute and ask your question if you still have one. Or we'll just continue with the other members. You can just unmute and ask your question. Okay, so while Makaya is fixing their mic, I think there's two questions that have come into the chat so far. Please load your questions and raise your hand if you'd like us to enable your mic to ask our panel questions. The two that were first after the one that we answered earlier on whistleblowing, the first is to you, Neil. And it speaks to say, given that we have gatekeeping mechanisms, especially in the public sector, bid committees, despite the individuals, these individuals still manage to beat the system and facilitate the appointment of a service provider that should have not been appointed. So he says, I like the comment made by yourself, Neil, on publicly displaying projects and financials in their respect. However, I doubt that if in our environment that will ever take off, as some of our top leaders are involved in some of these unethical activities, and we'll make sure that it doesn't take off. Have you found success in your line of space globally, outside of South Africa? And is this something that can work, or how?
It's a very interesting point. And the answer is we found no success, sadly, anywhere. I mean, there are some procurement systems which have a little bit more disclosure than others, and some procurement systems are more effective in the way they're ordered. But I would like to add one point, actually, I talked before about the minimum qualification of ISO 37001. That, in a way, would disqualify a lot of unregulated bidders, because it's quite a cost and expense to get that, and so that could deter some of the unregulated bidders. But secondly, certainly the transparency publication would make it very, very clear that people are getting awarded contracts who do not comply with the technical requirements. But there was a third control I didn't mention earlier, which I'll mention now, is that we recommend part of our project anti-corruption system mechanism that there's an independent monitoring mechanism also put in place on the larger construction projects, where a qualified independent monitor, who we'd expect probably to be a retired professional, someone who has served 40 or 50 years in the industry, is retired, doesn't want to give up, wants to put something back into society. They take on the role of independent monitors, and they monitor the entire project selection, design, procurement process, and construction process of a public sector project over a minimum threshold. And they would observe the procurement taking place. And they have an obligation under the system to publish a report on the internet at the completion of the procurement system. And they would immediately then report that the award has been made to a company which is unqualified and was against the procurement regulations. And that report would be put straight up on the internet by the independent monitor, and the reports have to be copied to the Anti-Corruption Commission, where the monitor suspects that the act is not just negligent or stupid, it's actually prima facie a corrupt act. So that would be a huge deterrent against this type of behavior. But coming back to your questioner's point, we find very little traction with public sector bodies anywhere in the world about implementing these mechanisms. And part of it could be arrogance, that people think we're doing it well, we don't need this. Part of it is cost protection. They say we don't want to do this because it'll be increased cost, although we would argue strongly the savings materially outweigh the cost of these control mechanisms. But partly, sadly, it's because the people in charge who can implement such a system are themselves corrupt. So this system will be cutting off their tap. And of course, I cannot ever answer the question as to which of the three categories the public sector people fall into, but we do not sadly succeed with our mission anywhere in the world currently. We are struggling an uphill battle to get these very limited points put in of an ISO requirement, public transparency, public whistleblowing, independent monitoring, which we think is very effective controls. It doesn't happen. It doesn't.
Thanks for that concise answer, Neil. And I also think it covers your question, Tato, relating to the challenges, the processes, how implementation can take place. And I see Thandeka's comment as well, very passionate, and really I feel the passion in your comment, and really heartbreaking to have to actually leave the industry because of these unfair, unethical, corrupt practices that are experienced. Mxolisi, I've enabled your audio. You can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Ntabeleng, and the rest of the speakers and the audience. Just want to thank you guys for speaking about something so important, you know. And I think with me being a professionally registered electrical engineer, having worked obviously in the private and the public space, at some point I worked with Takalani, she knows me well. I think it's really becoming a much bigger issue when it comes to being ethical within the workspace, because truth be told that people are in the business of making money. And when you try to pick up all of these things, it results in death threats, you know, and essentially it results in people losing their lives. So I think to a certain degree, we need some sort of protection. That's number one. But moreover, I think the councils that we are registered with need to start biting even more than they are, because fact of the matter is, you know, people are so divorced from the issues that we encounter in the workspace, simply on the basis that, like I think Ulufuna indicated, that you'd find a taxi driver that is bidding for work. He's bidding obviously to a certain degree with competent people. But once he gets the job, he would just, you know, get any Tom, Dick, and Harry who's possibly, you know, incompetent to actually do the job. But again, I think, you know, these things actually lie with us as the people who are appointed by different entities to ensure that we do not overlook these things, because you'd find that a particular task is being performed by somebody who is incompetent. And then you, as a competent person within the entity whom obviously you're trying to augment the services, either due to, you know, being overloaded, now you end up redoing the work that is actually done by this person. But at the same time, this person actually needs to get paid. So with that being said, when it comes to also the functionality, I know it's going to be a contentious point, but I think to a certain degree, we need to ensure that we standardize the functionality of this tender document, because you'd find that you go to a different entity, a certain entity has got its own, you know, functionality that is obviously there to suit certain companies so that they get the job. So I think, you know, these are the things that we need to discuss in different platforms to ensure that we safeguard, you know, the people that work for entities, but then again, ensuring that the people who actually get the job are the people that are competent within the industry. Thank you, Ntabeleng.
Thank you so much, Mxolisi. Very useful points indeed, and to learn from your space as well. Any comments from the panelists before we move on? I see we have 10 minutes on the clock. Vishal, I see you've unmuted your mic. Would you like to contribute?
Yeah, I'd like to share an idea before my colleague comments. Much of the laws, the constitution that we spoke about, the policies, the procurement rules, etc., these are human inventions. These are the rules of the game that we as humanity have manufactured to comply with. Okay, now we have individuals in the space that perhaps choose not to. So my comment was related to people, and I think the focus should be on the individual rather than on the process. Because irrespective of what process we design, if we have a cohort of individuals that promote unethical ways, it will continue to happen. So I think for me, what's more important is to ask the question, why? Why do we behave unethically? And if we reflect on why we behave unethically, we might start finding a chance of changing it. But to actually redesign a process or to make the rules even stronger, you will find that there's no correlation. Because the rules of the game 50 years ago did not have King, did not have IFRS, did not have PFMA. The more we legislate, it didn't seem to make much of a difference in our country, because we reach a state now where it is so widespread that whatever rule we have doesn't matter. That's the sense I'm having right now. So focusing on the individual, and if we do have time, we can probably explore that. Why does a person choose that way in life? It might be a question to reflect on, but let me leave it there as a comment. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Vishal. Yondela?
Thank you. Now, I just wanted to provide input on the issue of whistleblowing protection. I think the last speaker also touched on it. I didn't get his name. Yes. So I think, I don't know whether it's implementable in your industry, but just to share what has worked in our environment, we have strict anonymity options. So for instance, if you make a report, because when you don't have mechanisms for whistleblower protection, you're compromising their safety and their lives, because now they're exposed and they would have spoken up, but at what cost? So we have anonymity options. For instance, there are 3 options. You can choose to be completely anonymous. And then the second option, you can choose to be partially anonymous. And then the third one, you can leave your details. So we usually encourage the middle one, which is partially anonymous, because fear of victimization, retaliation, fear for own life is real. So what that option means is the person who's logging a report will leave the details with the third party, in which case for us, it works well because it's outsourced. So, and because Deloitte as a tip of anonymous is similarly bound by the Protected Disclosures Act, under no circumstances will they ever divulge the name of the person who made the tip-off, even though it's known to them. And what we then do in such instances is an additional layer to ensure whistleblower protection. We don't compromise. We then outsource such investigations and then leave the message to Deloitte to convey to the whistleblower that we've appointed this forensic company. Are you amenable to be interviewed? Or these are the points of clarity to also improve the quality of the investigation. I think in the interest of time, I'll park that. But I think if you strengthen your anonymity options, number one, and then secondly, escalation protocols, because you can't mark your own homework. So internally, for instance, even though I'm the custodian of the group tip-offs line, I can't investigate myself. So as a result, there are submitted escalation protocols that if there's a tip-off against Itabo, it jumps that layer and goes to that layer. So that works well, because then in terms of ensuring fairness and consistency in terms of these investigations and outcomes, so we have that, which works very well.
I see a very interesting question, and while I have you on the mic, Yondela, Masande asked to say, what would be the role that AI would perform in an effort to remove the human element in the processes? He says, I believe the common element in ethics is a warm body. Perhaps technology can assist in the elimination or shortlisting stages in procurement, for example, automated systems that would reject unqualified or non-registered professionals within the system. And let me take that from you, the response, and then I see your hand as well. Thabo, you can add on. Thank you.
Okay. So I don't think AI can completely replace ethics, because ethics there's an undertone of humanity. You deal with human beings, and AI has its aspect insofar as, for instance, risk assessment, risk screening, and due diligence and management of counterparty risk. So, which then means from a segregation of duties point of view, which is very important. So we then, because I see like he touches on shortlisting stages in terms of procurement. So procurement is completely segregated. They will do their due diligence in terms of passing the supplier. So that means the end user cannot mark his own homework. We cannot approve a supplier that you're going to use. So it's a separate segregated department. If they fail there in terms of the due diligence process, from a governance process, we also look at ABC compliance. We also look at any adverse media news. We also check any of the directors have been blacklisted. So that is then fed back to the end user. So you cannot approve. It will be procurement/strategic sourcing in our environment, which is a completely, which they have no view, no knowledge of that supplier that you would have actually passed on as a shortlisted entity to them.
Understood. Thank you, Yongela. Thabo, your thoughts? You're on mute.
Thank you,
Oh, there
Tabby.
we go. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. I just want to make some sort of a parting shot. Hey, I was just moved by Vishal's, articulate, his remark, particularly on the issue of the statements that we make that protects the perpetrators. What am I saying? If, for example, I'm saying men are corrupt, right? In the process, I'm protecting the men that are corrupt, because now I'm not dealing with the men that are corrupt within the fraternity of being men, if that makes sense. So now I wish we can be able to individualize these culprits. I like also the fact that, if we start to do again more red tapes, the true sense of the matter is ethics are coming from an individual. It's an enacted behavior. What is right or wrong should come within a person. You know what I mean? So now I'm also worried if you are still going on and making more and more of these in terms of the prescripts to actually tail the scourge. You know what I mean? I actually once, just as my last point, I just once at some point during the recruitment process within the district practice or introduced to shortlist using your Excel. It worked wonders, because what we attract more than 9,000 recruits, so to speak. And how do you choose one from the other? We introduced that Excel to actually be able to screen at least the first part of it. So I actually also, support the issue of maybe trying to limit the human element in terms of our decision makings in a form of recruitment, in a form of procuring, and so forth. Thank you very much, Tabby.
Thank you so much. Wow, our time is fast spent. Thank you also. So thanks, Thabo, and thanks, Vicky, for your comments as well. I see it in the chat. I think we have time for one last question. Cash, I've enabled your audio. Please unmute and ask your question. And once we have responded to Cash's question, I'm going to then kindly hand back to the chairperson of the SAICE Ethics Committee to give closing remarks before we close. Cash, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to ask the question. So I an engineer on one of Eskom's power stations. So I guess you could kind of say that we are in the belly of the beast when it comes to these sort of things. And I've noticed a lot of the conversations that have happened here today are all about ethical behaviors that are illegal, which is great. But I think we also need to be able to consider ethical or rather unethical behaviors that are actually legal. And my point of view on that one is working for a company like Eskom, where there's obviously millions of components and stuff, we are often held, if I can call it, at ransom by OEMs who are well aware of the state of the country, who are well aware of the state of Eskom, and will still insist on putting a 600%, an 800% markup on things that we require. So I just want to know, there's nothing illegal about what they're doing. At the end of the day, it comes down to brass tacks. Business is business, and I understand that. But from an SOE side, how do we actually get out of the hole that we are in where nothing protects the SOE illegally from needing to purchase these sort of spares and equipment from companies who hold the rights, intellectual properties to them, and we aren't even able to manufacture it ourselves? Thank you.
It's an interesting take. Lufuno, would you like to take that as we prepare to close?
Yes, yes. Let me quickly take that as well. Thank you. So I just want to maybe let me take this angle. I'm not sure if you can see my screen.
Not yet.
Okay, let me, sorry, it had closed for some funny reason. Let me do this. Okay, I'm sharing it there. Are you able to see the screen?
It's coming on now. Yes, we can.
Okay, so let me just put it on. Tavia, I'm panicking for your time. Now I'm sharing a wrong slide. Can you see the right slide now?
It's coming on. Yeah, we still see the same
Okay,
point.
that's fine. Let me just talk from it the way it is.
Okay, we see ethics and law now.
Yeah. So I just wanted to respond to what the speaker raised. It's quite critical. So there are aspects within the practices of both procurement and project management that are legal but not ethical. And there are also aspects that are aligned with both legality and ethical guidance. The example I can get closer to, maybe shying away from her specific example because I think it might take me longer than I desire, is the process of evaluating suppliers who have control of prices because they manufacture, and the suppliers that do not manufacture who are going to buy somewhere. Is that legal? Yes, it's legal. Is it ethical? Logically not, because you'll never be able to compare the two. Now, what I propose is to categorize businesses according to their financial muscles, amongst other things. So it doesn't mean that a smaller service provider can compete with a larger service provider in terms of the financials. And I know that I'm shying away from the specific that she asked, but I'm acknowledging one, that indeed legality does not mean that things are ethical. But these issues can be dealt with in bits and portions, meaning that suppliers must be categorized as much as individuals will be categorized according to their technical capacity, governance skills, and so on. So to bring and to marry legal aspects with ethical aspects will be driven by the ethical culture of the organization, not only want to tick the boxes of things that are not classified as criminal, but to also drive the aspects of who do we want to empower in the process, what values are we serving, who is ultimately the beneficiary. We can get closer to balance between our ethics and our law. I know there's still a lot to say around trying to respond to the question, but let me leave it there. Others can enhance it. Thank you very much.
And in saying that as well, I think this topic is inexhaustible, and we were not attempting by any means to exhaust it within the short space that we have. We do want to appreciate everyone who stayed on the line up until now. There's a lot of learnings that we've come out with. And without further ado, I'm going to invite Takalani, who's the chairperson of the SAICE Ethics Committee, to close us out. And from my side, thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you for being a wonderful panel, to our esteemed panel as well. Over to you, Takalani. Thanks a lot. Oh,
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Takalani, I see Tabo has a hand up, if you don't mind. Was that
Sorry,
a clap
ma'am,
or a hand?
Yeah, that's a clap, sorry.
Okay. Takalani, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ntabeleng, for facilitating the panelists, and thank you again to our esteemed panel members. I'd like to thank each and every single one of you, Mr. Vishal Lachman, Mr. Thabo Marala, Mr. Neil, as well as Dr. Yondelan Dema, for everything that you've done and for availing yourself for today's session. And again, thank you to Mr. Ratsiku for also touching on the key matters. I think if there's anything I can say is just to give one thing that I really believe stood out, and I believe we all have taken our different views and we've extracted the information relevant to us and our industries. But one thing I can say is from all the panelists, I've drawn that the first thing we need to identify is that ethics is about human behavior. We also need to understand that within our industry, especially in the public sector, that procurement measures need to also be monitored to ensure that organizations are provided the opportunity that they actually comply to. So some of the panelists have talked about ensuring that professionals are procured in certain organizations, but also ensuring that the public sector understands that it's actually detrimental to try and procure an organization that will not be able to meet the standard, and now you'll have other organizations having to redo the work. And then last but not least, understanding that training of individuals and actually empowering them to embark on ethical behaviors is also a part of the change that we also want to see, and not only blaming each other, but also taking accountability for each other's actions. So I think on that note, I'd like to again thank the attendees for availing themselves for today's session. As Ntabeleng has mentioned, we have not exhausted the topic at all. We definitely want to engage with you. We definitely want to also obtain additional input from you. I do see that some of the attendees have been sharing some videos and links, but we're also available should you have any additional concerns or queries that you'd like to raise as a member of the industry and also the built environment. So I think without taking too much time, again, thank you to our panelists and our facilitators, and more so then thank you to our organizing team. I'd like to also recognize Mr. Masande Tudula for organizing this Imbizo, and I look forward to having many more engagements, ensuring that we can actually start being a part of the change that we want to see in our industry. Thank you. And do have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Takalani. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.